welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we have a pretty simple dessert recipe for you. We're doing profiterole. Now this is a classic French dish. It is a choux pastry. It's the same kind of batter that's used to make eclairs, and these, which are usually cream stuffed and frequently dipped in chocolate, and pretty versatile. They're you can fill them with lots of things, and here's our ingredients. So we're starting off with some flour and a little tiny bit of nutmeg, a little bit of sugar, and just a pinch of salt. All the amounts are going to be in the description below. A fair amount of butter, and some water, and a mystery ingredient that we will be adding later that we forgot for the ingredient shot. So the first thing we're going to do is heat up our water. We want to get it pretty hot, but not boiling. We're going to add the salt and sugar, and we just want to get this all well dissolved in the water. Now we're going to get the water hot, just barely boiling, but not to a rolling boil. But the first thing we're going to do is we've got the water on the heat. We're going to make sure that the sugar and the salt are well dissolved. So just give that a good stir. That doesn't take very long to do. Once the water is just barely starting to boil, you don't want it at a rolling boil, just barely boiling. We're going to add our butter, and we're going to let that melt in there. So we're adding our butter. It is cubed, so it melts a little bit faster. We're just going to whisk that in until it's well combined, just to let it melt. It shouldn't take very long. Your butter doesn't need to be super, super cold because we do need it melted. All right, so once your butter is completely melted and the water has come back up to a boil, again, just barely boiling, you don't want a really strong rolling boil. You can see it boiling in the middle there. If it's just starting to boil, that's just about perfect, but not like a super busy rolling boil. We're going to turn off the heat, and we're going to add our flour. And then we're just going to whisk our flour in. Now, if you, like us, used a slightly too small pot for your choux pastry, then we can fix that a little bit later. So what we're going to do is just make sure that everything is well combined. So the flour and butter and water with our salt and sugar, we're just going to make sure it's all well whisked together. Basically, we're trying to make a pretty stiff dough here. And once it starts pulling away from the side of the pot, you know you're just about ready. Once it's all well combined and it's starting to pull away from the pot, you do want to put the heat back on. You don't want the flour to be completely raw, so we are going to make sure that this is well cooked. So we're going to put it on like a medium heat. And we're just going to keep stirring to make sure that everything is really well combined, very, very smooth. No lumps, no bits of flour or anything. Everything has to be well combined. So when it starts to look about like this, everything's well combined. You have no lumps of flour or anything in there. Everything's just nice and smooth. We're going to take it off the heat. And we're going to move this into a bigger container because, as I said, we did use a slightly too small pot for this. So we're going to scrape everything out into this nice bowl. And don't worry if this starts to cool things a little bit. Everything should be well cooked at this point. The flour shouldn't be raw anymore. And now we're going to add our mystery ingredient, the eggs that we missed in the ingredient shot. I apologize for that. Now, anyone who has made this before might recognize this. It's very similar to the Joy of French Cooking style of choux pastry, which this is derived from. It's sort of the standard go-to for most people. It's a very simple, kind of a no-fail choux pastry recipe. And we're going to add 3 eggs to this, beating well in between just to make sure that everything's well combined. And after the 3rd egg, you're going to have a much looser, more like a batter than a dough. But you can see here, after you add the eggs, it has this beautiful glossy finish. It's nice and smooth. Really looks excellent. So once you've got that nice, smooth, glossy batter, and everything's well combined, everything's nice and smooth, you know you're just about there. Now for profiterole, traditionally it is piped out. So if you have a piping bag, you can, pipe your nice little perfect about 1-inch circles. But we are going to do this just with teaspoons. So very similar to some other recipes we've done, where you just take a couple of spoons and make what they call a cannelle. Just the shape of the two spoons hitting each other. And that's just about the right amount. And you can see there is a little bit of gluten formed. You can see it's a little bit stretchy, but it's still quite a loose batter. It's not a very, very tough dough or anything, and that's exactly where you want it. This is just about perfect. Now we ended up doing this over 2 separate trays of this. Once you've got everything out on the tray, what you're going to do is, with some wet fingers, don't worry if they're not perfectly formed or anything, because what you're going to do next is, with some wet fingers, you're just going to smooth out any little knobs sticking out or any little bits. Just make them a little rounder, and to make sure that the outside is a little bit moist. One of the things with choux pastry is they need a pretty damp environment. So you can see we're putting this in the oven over a tray of water that's going to evaporate over the course. So those are going to go to the oven for about 20 minutes over that tray of boiling water. And after 20 minutes, that's what they look like. They puff up like crazy. They're gonna crack a little bit. That's perfect. That's just fine. Now, what we're doing next, this is to let a little bit of the steam out. They are full of water vapor at this point. And if we let the steam out, they will stay a little crispier than if we don't. So what we're going to do is just very carefully poke a little hole, a little vent in the bottom to let some of the steam out. And we're just going to let them rest like this. Now, they will collapse just a little tiny bit because of this, but they will stay crispier. So we're just going to poke a little hole in the bottom of each of these. And then what we're going to do next is put it back in the oven that we have turned off. We're going to get rid of the tray of boiling water. You can see that sizzling at the bottom there. We're going to get rid of that, and we're just going to leave the oven open. So we've turned the oven off. We're just going to put these into the warm oven that is a little bit open. Just has to be open a crack. And it's going to go in there for another few minutes. Again, all of the descriptions are going to be, all of the amounts of time are going to be in the description below. And you can see here they have collapsed just a little tiny bit, but they're still beautiful. They're nice and crispy, and they're going to stay crispy inside. Now, you can fill these with anything. Traditional is sort of a Bavoise or a Bavarian cream or a pastry cream. We're just going to use whipped cream for this because we're going to serve them right away. So we're just using some whipping cream, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of sugar, and we're just going to whip this with our stick blender. If you have a stick blender, you might have that little attachment that looks like a disc that's kind of off balance. You don't want to straighten that out. That is your whipping attachment. And it is very, very quick at whipping cream. So this is, again, just a little bit of sugar, some whipping cream, some 35% cream. And again, you can pipe these if you want to fill them with a piping bag. It is possible to do it that way, but that is not required. You can see they're nice and puffy, so they've got a lot of space inside. So what we're going to do is we're just going to cut them open. And we're just going to fill them with this whipping cream. And you can see they close up nicely because they do have all that nice space inside. They're beautiful and crispy. They have this nice crispy outside, that beautiful sweet cream inside, and on the top we're just going to dollop a little bit of this really nice chocolate sauce that will actually be our recipe for next week. So We're just going to put a little bit of chocolate sauce, and that's a pretty traditional presentation for these. And really, that's it. A little dust of sugar on top there, and these are done. And that's your profiterole. You want to serve them pretty soon after baking them, and they're nice and crispy, beautiful and tender, filled with that whatever nice filling you want. You can fill them with ice cream. You can fill them with whipping cream or whipped cream. You can fill them with a little bit of pastry cream, whatever you're making at home at that time. So if you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. And remember to love your food.